A rifle butt struck Felicity Davis's face as her students' reading primers flew into the muddy street of Dallas, Texas. Blood trickled from her split lip as she scrambled to recover the precious books, only to have a boot crush her fingers against the ground. It was 1859, and teaching slaves to read had just cost her everything. "Thought you could get away with it, didn't you? Educating property," Sheriff Holden sneered, yanking Felicity to her feet by her chestnut hair. "10 lashes and public humiliation ought to teach you better sense." The town had gathered to witness her punishment. Some looked away in shame, others with vindictive pleasure. Felicity had been the schoolteacher for the white children of Dallas for 3 years. But her secret evening lessons for slaves had finally been discovered when 8-year-old Thomas, one of her black students, had been caught reading a psalm to his dying grandmother. "Please," she begged, not for herself but for the books being trampled underfoot. "They've done nothing wrong, they only want to learn. Learning ain't for slaves," the sheriff spat, shoving her toward the whipping post at the center of town. "It puts ideas in their heads." As they tied her wrists to the post, Felicity caught sight of her students, the white children, looking on in horror, and hiding in the shadows, the slaves she'd taught in secret, their faces etched with fear and sorrow. Her 22 years of life might end here today, she thought, but at least she'd done something meaningful with them. The first lash tore through her dress and into her flesh. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, tasting copper as blood filled her mouth. By the 5th lash, her vision had begun to blur, and by the 8th, she had slumped forward, held up only by the ropes binding her wrists. Then suddenly, a commanding voice cut through the crowd. "That's enough." The whip paused mid-air. The crowd parted to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man astride a Palomino horse. His face was weather-beaten beneath his wide-brimmed hat, his eyes the sharp blue of a winter sky. Dust coated his denim pants and leather vest, telling of a long journey. "This ain't your business, Odell," the sheriff warned, but his voice had lost some of its authority. "I reckon it is now," the stranger Odell replied, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who lived in the saddle. "This town might have forgotten its humanity, but I haven't forgotten mine." He strode forward, each step purposeful, until he stood between Felicity and the whip. "Cut her down. She broke the law," Sheriff Holden insisted, though he'd lowered the whip. "Teaching slaves to read is illegal in Texas, and what kind of law condemns knowledge?" Odell challenged, his voice carrying across the now silent square. "What kind of men are we to fear education so much that we'd beat a woman half to death for providing it?" Felicity, drifting in and out of consciousness, barely registered the argument unfolding before her. She felt someone cutting her bonds, strong arms catching her as she collapsed. "She needs a doctor," Odell said firmly. "Doc Jensen won't treat her," someone from the crowd called out. "Not after this." "Then I'll take her to my ranch," Odell declared. "And while I'm at it," he turned to face the sheriff directly. "Miss Davis, if you survive this, I'd like to hire you to teach my children too." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "Odell Grayson, you've been away too long," Sheriff Holden said. "Things have changed. We don't tolerate abolitionists around here." "I ain't asking for your tolerance, Holden," Odell replied evenly, lifting Felicity's battered form into his arms. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. This woman is coming with me, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me and my rifle." As if to punctuate his statement, several riders appeared at the edge of town Odell's ranch hands, armed and watchful. Sheriff Holden glanced at them, then back at Odell, clearly calculating his odds. Finally, he spat on the ground. "Take her then, but she's not welcome back in Dallas." "Seems to me Dallas just lost the only person worth having," Odell replied, carrying Felicity to his horse and carefully placing her across the saddle before mounting behind her. As they rode out of town, Felicity drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of strong arms holding her steady and a deep voice promising that she was safe now. The journey to the Grayson ranch passed in a haze of pain for Felicity. Every jolt of the horse sent fresh agony through her lacerated back, but Odell kept her secure against his chest, whispering reassurances whenever she whimpered. "Not much further now," he murmured as they crested a hill, revealing a sprawling ranch nestled in a green valley below. "Just hold on a little longer, Miss Davis." A woman with silver-streaked hair rushed from the main house as they approached, her face lined with concern. "Odell, what in heaven's name, Rosa, prepare the guest room," Odell called out, carefully dismounting while supporting Felicity. "And bring your medicines. She's been whipped something fierce." Rosa's eyes widened at the sight of Felicity's bloodied dress. "Dios mío," she whispered, crossing herself before hurrying back inside. The ranch house was larger than Felicity had expected, built of sturdy timber with a wide wraparound porch. Inside, it smelled of beeswax and fresh bread, a stark contrast to the iron tang of blood that had filled her senses. Rosa led them to a bright room with windows overlooking the valley. "Put her on her stomach," she instructed, pulling back the quilt on the bed. "I'll need warm water and the herbs from my cabinet." As Odell gently laid her down, Felicity's eyes fluttered open. "The children," she whispered. "My students." "Rest now," Odell said, his voice gentler than she would have expected from such a formidable man. "You're safe here." "Your children," she managed. "You said, teach them." A shadow crossed his face. "Yes, I did, and I meant it, but first you need to heal." Rosa returned with a basin of water and various jars of salves and tinctures. "Out now," she told Odell firmly. "This is women's work." As he left, Felicity caught sight of a picture frame on the dresser, a portrait of a woman with kind eyes and 3 small children clustered around her. Rosa followed her gaze. "His wife, Eleanor," she explained, helping Felicity out of her ruined dress. "She passed 2 winters ago. Pneumonia took her, leaving Odell with the 3 little ones." Felicity winced as Rosa began cleaning her wounds. "How old are they?" "James is 10, Sarah 8, and little Thomas just turned 6. Rosa said, her hands surprisingly gentle for someone so efficient. "They've had no proper schooling since their mother died. Odell tries, but he's busy with the ranch and I'm no teacher." "Thomas," Felicity repeated, the name conjuring the image of the slave boy whose reading had led to her discovery. She wondered what had happened to him. "You rest now," Rosa soothed, applying a pungent salve to Felicity's back. "The children will be eager to meet you once you're recovered, but that won't be for a few days at least." Darkness was falling outside the windows, and with it came the distant sounds of cattle lowing and men calling to each other as they returned from the day's work. It felt like another world from the one Felicity had known that morning, a world away from the whipping post and the hateful faces of people she'd once considered neighbors. "Why did he do it?" she asked softly. "Mr. Grayson, why did he save me?" Rosa's hands paused briefly in their work. Odell has always had his own ideas about right and wrong, and he believes strongly in education, perhaps because he had so little of it himself. But harboring me could bring trouble to his ranch, to his family. Rosa agreed, but Odell Grayson has never been a man to run from trouble, especially when he believes he's in the right. As Rosa finished bandaging her back, Felicity closed her eyes, exhaustion finally claiming her. Her last thought before sleep took her was of the strange contradiction of this man, a rugged cowboy who would risk everything to defend a woman he'd never met, all for the sake of education. The next 3 days passed in a blur of pain, fever, and fitful sleep. Rosa tended to her faithfully, changing her bandages and feeding her broth when she could manage it. Odell checked on her progress regularly but kept a respectful distance, only entering the room when Rosa was present. On the 4th morning, Felicity awoke feeling clearer-headed than she had since the whipping. The sun streamed through the lace curtains, casting dappled patterns across the quilt. For the first time, she took in her surroundings properly: the polished oak dresser with its silver-backed hairbrush, the braided rug on the wooden floor, the vase of wildflowers on the bedside table. "Those are from Sarah," came Odell's deep voice from the doorway. He stood with his hat in his hands, looking somewhat awkward. "She's been gathering them every morning, hoping you'd wake up to see them." Felicity managed to push herself into a sitting position, wincing slightly. "That's very thoughtful of her. I'd like to thank her." "You'll meet them all soon enough," he assured her, remaining by the door. "Rosa says your fever's broken, which is a good sign." There was an uncomfortable silence as Felicity studied the man who had saved her life. In the soft morning light, she could see him more clearly than she had in town. He was perhaps 35, with laugh lines around his eyes despite his serious expression. His brown hair was touched with early gray at the temples, and a scar ran along his jawline. Mr. Grayson, she began. Odell, please, he interrupted. Mr. Grayson was my father. Odell, then, she conceded. I need to thank you for what you did in town. You risked a great deal for a stranger. He shook his head. I did what any decent man would have done. We both know that isn't true, she countered softly. Most decent men stood by and watched, his jaw tightened. Then maybe my definition of decency differs from theirs. Why? She pressed. Why would you put yourself, your ranch, your children at risk for me? Odell was silent for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. I was in town to pick up supplies when I heard what was happening. They were talking about it in the general store, how the schoolteacher had been caught teaching slaves to read. Some were outraged, others were. He hesitated. Others seemed to relish the idea of seeing you punished. Felicity shuddered, remembering the hungry looks on some faces in the crowd. I was raised by a man who couldn't read his own name, Odell continued. My father signed contracts with an ex and was cheated more times than I can count because of it. He died believing he was worth less than men who could read, and I swore my children would never feel that shame. His eyes met hers directly. When I saw you at that post being punished for giving the gift of reading to those who needed it most, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. His honesty moved her deeply. And now, you mentioned teaching your children. The offer still stands if you're interested, he said. Full room and board plus wages. The children need proper schooling and there's no teacher for 50 miles now that Dallas has run you out. What of the law? Teaching slaves is still illegal even here. A hint of a smile touched his lips. I don't have slaves, Miss Davis. Never have, never will. What you do with your free time here is your business as long as my children get their education. She understood his meaning perfectly. In that case, Mr. Grayson, Odell, I believe we have an arrangement. He nodded, relief evident in his posture. Rosa says you should be able to join us for supper tonight if you feel up to it. The children are mighty eager to meet their new teacher. As he turned to leave, Felicity called after him, Odell. He paused, looking back. Thank you, not just for saving me, but for believing that everyone deserves to learn. It means more than you know. His expression softened. Rest up, Miss Davis. Teaching 3 Grayson children might make you wish you were back at that whipping post. It was the first joke he'd made, and despite the grim reference, Felicity found herself smiling as he left. Perhaps, she thought, this unexpected turn of events might lead to something good after all. That evening, with Rosa's help, Felicity dressed in a borrowed gown and made her way carefully downstairs. The ranch house revealed itself to be both practical and comfortable, a home designed for family living rather than showing off wealth. The dining room held a long oak table, already set for the evening meal, with windows overlooking pastures that seemed to stretch forever into the gathering dusk. She heard them before she saw them, children's voices raised in excited chatter, a deeper voice trying unsuccessfully to impose order. Following the sounds, she entered to find Odell attempting to settle 3 energetic children into their chairs. James, hands washed. He was asking the oldest, a lanky boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of unruly brown hair. Yes, Pa, the boy answered, though he immediately tucked his hands under the table, making Felicity suspect otherwise. Sarah, stop fidgeting with your ribbons, Odell continued, addressing a girl with golden brown braids who was indeed tugging at the blue ribbons tying them. They're too tight, the child complained. Rosa tied them just fine, Odell said with the weariness of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. Then, turning to the youngest, a small boy with solemn eyes, he asked, And you, Thomas, ready for supper? The boy nodded silently, then was the first to notice Felicity standing in the doorway. His eyes widened and he tugged at his father's sleeve, pointing. Odell turned, and for a moment, Felicity saw something flicker across his face, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. Miss Davis, he said, quickly recovering. We're glad you could join us. 3 pairs of curious eyes fixed on her as she stepped further into the room. Children, Odell continued, this is Miss Davis. She'll be your new teacher. James straightened immediately, clearly trying to make a good impression. Sarah beamed, revealing a missing front tooth. Little Thomas simply stared, his thumb creeping toward his mouth before he seemed to remember himself and lowered it. I'm very pleased to meet you all, Felicity said, smiling despite the pain that still radiated across her back with every movement. I look forward to getting to know each of you. Are you feeling better now? Sarah asked bluntly. Pa said you were hurt bad and we weren't to disturb you. Sarah, Odell admonished gently. It's all right, Felicity assured him, taking the seat he pulled out for her. Yes, I'm feeling much better, thank you for asking. Pa said you got in trouble for teaching people to read, James said, his eyes serious beyond his years. Why would anyone get in trouble for that? Felicity glanced at Odell, uncertain how much the children knew or how much he wanted them to know. Sometimes, Odell said carefully, people are afraid of things changing. They think if certain folks learn to read, they might start wanting other things too, like freedom and fair treatment. But don't all people deserve those things? James pressed. Odell's face softened with pride. Yes, son, they do. That's why Miss Davis is a brave woman and why she's welcome here at our table. Rosa entered then, carrying a steaming pot of stew, followed by a young man Felicity hadn't met yet, who brought a platter of cornbread. Miss Davis, this is Miguel, Rosa's son, Odell explained. He helps manage the ranch with me. Miguel, who appeared to be in his early 20s, nodded respectfully. Pleased to meet you, miss. Glad to see you up and about. The meal that followed was livelier than any Felicity had experienced in years. The Grayson children, initially shy, soon warmed to her presence, peppering her with questions about what they would learn, whether she would be strict, and if she knew any good stories. I know hundreds of stories, she assured them, though some we'll have to read together. I'm not very good at reading yet, Thomas admitted quietly. Felicity leaned toward him conspiratorially. Can I tell you a secret? When he nodded eagerly, she continued, the best readers often start out thinking they're not very good. It just means you have all the wonderful discoveries ahead of you. His solemn little face brightened at this thought. Throughout the meal, Felicity couldn't help but notice Odell watching her interactions with his children. There was something guarded in his expression, as though he was measuring her against some private standard. She wondered if he was thinking of their mother, comparing the way Alina might have answered their questions to the way Felicity did. After supper, Rosa shooed the children upstairs for their baths, and Miguel excused himself to check on a mare about to foal, leaving Felicity alone with Odell. An awkward silence settled between them. Your children are wonderful, she said finally, meaning it sincerely. You've done a remarkable job with them. Alina deserves most of the credit, he replied, his voice softening at his late wife's name. She gave them a strong foundation. I'm sure she did, Felicity acknowledged, but children reflect their daily influences as well. They clearly adore you. He seemed uncomfortable with the praise. We should discuss your duties, he said, changing the subject. I was thinking you could begin lessons next week once you're more fully recovered. That seems sensible, she agreed. Could you tell me what they've learned so far? What books you have available? Alina taught them their letters and basic sums before she passed, he explained, relaxing somewhat as they moved to practical matters. Since then, I've done what I could in the evenings, but I'm no teacher. We have a small collection of books, mostly Alina's. The Bible, of course, some Shakespeare, a few volumes of history and natural philosophy. That's a good start, Felicity said encouragingly. I saved a few of my own books as well, she hesitated. That is, Rosa managed to retrieve the satchel I had with me in town. There are some primers and readers I used with my students. A shadow crossed his face at the reminder of what she'd endured. I'm sorry I couldn't save more of your belongings. You saved me, she said simply. The rest is just things. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, something passed between them, a shared understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of mutual respect. The moment was broken by a plaintive call from upstairs. Pa, Thomas won't get in the tub, Odell sighed, the corner of his mouth quirking up. Duty calls, he said, rising. Rosa will help you back to your room if you need it. Actually, Felicity said, I think I'd like to sit on the porch for a while if that's all right. I've been inside for days. He nodded. Of course, there's a rocking chair out there that's mighty comfortable. Just don't overdo it. Rosa would have my hide if you set back your recovery. As he headed upstairs to wrangle his reluctant son into a bath, Felicity made her way to the porch. The evening air was cool but not cold, carrying the sense of sage and distant rain. Stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. She eased herself into the rocking chair Odell had mentioned, mindful of her healing back. From here, she could see the ranch spreading out before her, the barn and stables, corrals and bunkhouse, all laid out with practical efficiency. Beyond them, pastures rolled away toward distant hills, dotted with the shadows of cattle. It was about as far from her former life as she could imagine. Before Dallas, she'd taught at a small school in Boston, living in a narrow boarding house with other unmarried women. The West had called to her with its promise of adventure and opportunity, but she'd never envisioned this rescued from public disgrace by a widowed rancher, preparing to teach his children while recovering from a whipping. Life, she reflected, had a way of taking unexpected turns. The question was whether this particular turn would lead to something worth staying for. The following week passed in a rhythm of healing and preparation. Each day, Felicity felt a little stronger, able to move with less pain and stay active for longer periods. She spent her mornings with Rosa, learning the rhythms of the ranch house and discussing what the children would need for their lessons. "James is bright but restless," Rosa told her as they folded laundry together. "He needs challenges to keep his mind occupied or he finds mischief." And Sarah. "A dreamer," Rosa said fondly. "She loves stories and makes up her own. She'll sit for hours with paper and pencil, drawing and writing little tales." "What about Thomas?" Felicity asked, carefully folding one of the small shirts that belonged to the youngest Grayson. Rosa's expression softened. "He's the one who remembers his mother most clearly, I think. Quiet, watches everything. Clever, but he doesn't show it the way James does." In the afternoons, when the children returned from their morning chores, Felicity began getting to know them, informally listening to Sarah's stories, discussing James's interests, and gently drawing Thomas out of his shell. By the end of the week, even the solemn youngest child would seek her out, often bringing her interesting rocks or feathers he'd found. Odell was less present during this time, busy with spring calving and the 1,000 tasks that running a cattle ranch entailed. When their paths did cross, usually at supper, he was unfailingly polite but somewhat reserved. Felicity sensed he was watching, evaluating whether his impulsive decision to bring her to his home had been the right one. On Sunday, a week and a half after her arrival at the ranch, Odell announced at breakfast that they would attend church in the small settlement of Willow Creek, about an hour's ride away. "You're welcome to join us, Miss Davis," he said, "though I'd understand if you preferred to rest." "I'd like to come," she replied, both because she genuinely wished to attend services and because she was curious about the community Odell considered friendly, unlike Dallas. The journey to Willow Creek was Felicity's first real outing since the whipping. Odell drove the wagon himself, with the children and Felicity seated on benches in the back. The day was glorious, bright spring sunshine, wildflowers dotting the rolling hills, and a breeze that carried the scent of new growth. "Will people know who I am?" Felicity asked quietly when the children were distracted by a jackrabbit bounding alongside the road. Odell glanced back at her. "News travels even out here," he admitted. "But the folks in Willow Creek are different from Dallas. Many came west to escape judgments of their own." Willow Creek proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings around a crossroads: a general store, blacksmith shop, small hotel, and the whitewashed church that was their destination. Several wagons and horses were already gathered outside as they arrived. Felicity felt nervous as Odell helped her down from the wagon, conscious of curious glances from those already arriving for the service. She wore one of Rosa's dresses, hastily altered to fit her slimmer frame, and felt painfully aware of her outsider status. "Odell," called a jovial voice, and a portly man with a magnificent white beard approached them. "Good to see you and the young uns too, Reverend Porter," Odell greeted him with a handshake. "I'd like you to meet Miss Felicity Davis. She's the new teacher for my children." The Reverend's bushy eyebrows rose slightly, but his smile remained warm as he took Felicity's hand between both of his. "Miss Davis, you are most welcome at our humble church. Any friend of the Graysons is a friend of ours." His emphasis on friend made it clear he knew exactly who she was and what had happened in Dallas. The fact that he welcomed her anyway eased some of the tension in Felicity's shoulders. Inside the simple church, the Grayson family and Felicity took a pew near the back. As the congregation filled in around them, Felicity noticed something surprising. While most churchgoers were white, there were several Mexican families present, as well as 2 black families seated without segregation among the others. The service was straightforward but heartfelt, with Reverend Porter delivering a sermon on the Good Samaritan that seemed particularly pointed given recent events. Throughout, Felicity was aware of occasional glances in her direction, but they felt more curious than condemning. After the service, there was a social gathering outside, with families sharing food and conversation in the spring sunshine. Odell introduced Felicity to several neighbors, including the blacksmith and his wife, a physician and his family, and the owner of the general store. "So you'll be teaching Odell's wild bunch?" the blacksmith's wife asked with a twinkle in her eye. "You must have the patience of a saint." "They're wonderful children," Felicity replied sincerely. "I'm looking forward to beginning formal lessons tomorrow." "They need a woman's influence," the storekeeper's wife commented, glancing meaningfully at Odell, who was deep in conversation with the blacksmith several paces away. "That house has been too quiet since Alina passed." The comment made Felicity uncomfortable. "I'm simply their teacher," she clarified. The women exchanged knowing looks that Felicity pretended not to notice. As they prepared to leave, Reverend Porter approached Felicity again. "Miss Davis, if you find yourself with extra time," he said quietly, "we have several families here who would appreciate additional education for their children. Our school meets only 3 days a week, and the teacher can't possibly cover everything the children need to know." She understood his meaning perfectly. "I'd be happy to offer whatever assistance I can, Reverend," he nodded, satisfied. "Odell knows how to reach me if you're interested in discussing it further." On the ride back to the ranch, the children chattered excitedly about seeing their friends at church, but Felicity was thoughtful. The community at Willow Creek was clearly different from Dallas, more tolerant, more diverse. It made her wonder about Odell and what had shaped his views, so at odds with many of his contemporaries. "You're quiet," he observed when the children had finally exhausted themselves and dozed off in the back of the wagon. "Just thinking," she replied. "Willow Creek seems like an unusual place for Texas," he nodded. "It started as a stopping point for all sorts traders, fugitives, people looking for second chances. No one asked too many questions about where you came from or what you were running from, including you," she ventured. A faint smile touched his lips. "Including me, though I wasn't running from the law, if that's what you're asking. What were you running from then?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. "I'm sorry, that's much too personal." "Maybe someday I'll tell you," he said after a pause, his eyes on the road ahead. "But not today." The next morning marked the official start of lessons for the Grayson children. Odell had cleared out a small room off the main parlor, furnishing it with a large table, chairs, a blackboard, and shelves for books. It was simple but functional, a classroom created specifically for Felicity to teach his children. "It's perfect," she told him sincerely as he showed her the space. "Thank you for preparing it. Alina always wanted a proper schoolroom," he explained, looking around with a touch of melancholy. "She taught them at the kitchen table, but she talked about having a dedicated space someday." Felicity touched his arm lightly. "I'm sure she would be pleased to see this," he nodded, clearing his throat. "Well, I'll leave you to it. The children know to mind you, but if James gets too rambunctious, just send him to me." The first day of lessons went better than Felicity had expected. The children, excited to have a real teacher again, were on their best behavior. James proved to be quick with numbers but impatient with reading. Sarah loved literature and history but struggled with arithmetic. Thomas, as Rosa had suggested, was cleverer than he first appeared, absorbing everything with quiet intensity. By the end of that first week, they had established a comfortable routine. Mornings were devoted to reading, writing, and arithmetic. After a break for the midday meal, afternoons alternated between history, natural science, and on Fridays, art and music. "Pa says you got in trouble for teaching slaves," James said one afternoon as they were studying American history, the directness of children cutting straight to what adults had danced around. Felicity hesitated, uncertain how to respond. "It's true," she finally acknowledged. "In Dallas and in many places, it's against the law to teach enslaved people to read or write." "But why?" Sarah asked, genuinely perplexed. "Reading is wonderful." "Some people believe that knowledge is dangerous," Felicity explained carefully. They think if enslaved people can read, they might learn ideas about freedom and equality. Are those bad ideas? Thomas asked in his small, serious voice. No, Felicity said firmly, they're not bad ideas at all. But they're ideas that would change the way some people live and do business, and change can be frightening. James frowned, processing this. So you broke the law because you thought the law was wrong? Yes, she admitted. I believed then, and I believe now, that everyone deserves the chance to learn. Is that why Pa brought you here? Sarah asked. Because he thinks so too. You'd have to ask your father about that, Felicity replied, though she suspected the answer was yes. That evening, after the children were in bed, Felicity found herself alone with Odell on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. For several minutes they sat in companionable silence, rocking gently in adjacent chairs. James asked me today about teaching slaves, she finally said. About why I was punished for it. Odell nodded, unsurprised. I wondered when that would come up. What did you tell him? She recounted the conversation, then asked, was I wrong to be so honest with them? No, he replied without hesitation. I've never believed in sheltering children from the truth. They see more than we give them credit for anyway. They're fortunate to have a father who thinks that way, she observed. Most men would prefer their children remain ignorant of such complexities. Most men are fools, he said bluntly, making her laugh in surprise. The sound of her laughter seemed to please him, and his expression softened in the dim light from the window behind them. I've been meaning to ask you, he said after another comfortable silence. Rosa mentioned you were gathering teaching materials. Is there anything you need that we don't have? Actually, yes, she admitted. More advanced readers for James, perhaps some geography materials, maps if possible, and blank journals for the children to practice their writing. I'll send Miguel to Willow Creek tomorrow, he promised. Anything else? She hesitated, then decided to be bold. Reverend Porter mentioned there might be other children in need of education. I was wondering if perhaps once a week I might offer additional lessons in town. Odell was quiet for a moment and she worried she had overstepped. Then he said, You know some of those children would be black or Mexican? Yes, she acknowledged. And you know what happened the last time you taught children who weren't white? I do. He studied her in the moonlight. You're a brave woman, Felicity Davis. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sent an unexpected warmth through her. Not brave, she corrected softly, just stubborn about what matters. A smile tugged at his mouth. Stubborn is good, stubborn lasts when brave gets tired. He rose from his chair. I'll speak to Reverend Porter next Sunday about arranging space for your additional classes. If you're determined to do this, I want to make sure you're protected while doing it. As he bid her good night and went inside, Felicity remained on the porch, thinking about his words. In Boston, then in Dallas, she'd been alone in her convictions, fighting against prevailing attitudes with only her own moral certainty to sustain her. Here, for the first time, she had an ally. More than that, she had someone who seemed to understand her purpose and wanted to help her achieve it. The realization was both comforting and confusing, stirring feelings she hadn't expected to develop for the taciturn rancher. Spring deepened into early summer as the weeks passed. The ranch bloomed with wildflowers, and new calves dotted the pastures. Felicity's back healed, leaving scars that would never fade but no longer caused her pain. She grew more comfortable in her role, not just as teacher to the Grayson children, but as a permanent resident of the ranch. Each Saturday, with Odell's blessing, she traveled to Willow Creek to teach additional classes in a room behind the church. Her students, there were a diverse group, the children of ranch hands and shopkeepers, a Mexican family whose father worked as a horse trainer, and two black families who had come west as free people seeking opportunity. Word spread about the unusual arrangement, but the community of Willow Creek, true to Odell's description, minded its own business. If there were those who disapproved, they kept their opinions to themselves. One Wednesday evening in late June, Felicity was grading the children's arithmetic exercises on the porch when she heard the thundering of hooves approaching. Looking up, she saw Odell galloping toward the house, his expression grim. "What is it?" she asked, rising as he dismounted in a cloud of dust. "Riders coming," he said tersely. "From Dallas, Miguel spotted them about 5 miles out." Fear clutched at her heart. "Sheriff Holden looks that way," Odell confirmed. Rosa's taking the children to the root cellar as a precaution. You should join them. No, she said firmly, surprising herself as much as him. I won't hide. Whatever they want, it involves me. He looked as though he might argue, then nodded sharply. Stay behind me when they arrive. Let me do the talking. Within minutes, 5 riders appeared on the road leading to the ranch house. Sheriff Holden led them, his badge catching the late afternoon sun. Behind him rode 4 men Felicity recognized from Dallas, including Thomas Jenkins, the owner of the slave boy she'd taught to read. Odell stood on the porch steps, his stance casual but alert. Behind him, Felicity noticed several ranch hands drifting closer, including Miguel, who carried a rifle that looked well used. Grayson, Sheriff Holden called as they approached, reining in his horse. Fine evening. Was, Odell replied evenly, until uninvited guests showed up. Holden's mouth twitched with irritation. We've come for the woman. Miss Davis is employed here as my children's teacher, Odell said, his voice dangerously calm. She's not going anywhere. Thomas Jenkins spurred his horse forward. That woman stole from me, he spat. Taught my property to read, filled his head with notions above his station. Boy ran off 3 weeks ago, took my best horse too. Felicity's heart leaped at the news that Thomas had escaped, though she kept her expression neutral. Sounds like a management problem on your part, Odell observed coldly. Nothing to do with Miss Davis. The hell it doesn't, Jenkins snarled. She's the one put ideas in his head. And now I hear she's at it again, teaching coloreds over in Willow Creek. So that was it. Someone had reported her Saturday classes. What Miss Davis teaches and to whom is no concern of yours, Odell stated. You're on my land now, not in Dallas. I suggest you turn around and ride back where you came from. Sheriff Holden's hand drifted toward his pistol. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Grayson. In response, a distinctive click sounded as Miguel cocked his rifle. Around the yard, other ranch hands appeared, all armed, moving to position themselves strategically. 5 of you, Odell noted casually. 15 of us. Those aren't odds I'd bet on, Holden. For a tense moment, no one moved. Felicity held her breath, acutely aware that violence could erupt any second. Then, unexpectedly, another rider appeared on the road, Reverend Porter from Willow Creek, his white beard unmistakable even at a distance. Gentlemen, he called as he approached, as though happening upon them by chance. What a fortunate meeting. I was just coming to speak with Odell about our church picnic next week. The Reverend's arrival broke the tension, injecting a note of civilized conversation into what had been building toward a shootout. These men were just leaving, Reverend, Odell said pointedly. Sheriff Holden glared at Odell, then at Felicity. This isn't over, he warned. That woman's breaking the law, and sooner or later she'll answer for it. Perhaps, Reverend Porter interjected mildly, you gentlemen are unfamiliar with the particular statutes of this county. While I'm no lawyer, I believe you'll find our local ordinances differ somewhat from those in Dallas. Holden frowned. What are you talking about, old man? Why, our county never formally adopted the restrictive educational laws you're referencing, the Reverend explained, as though discussing the weather. An oversight, perhaps, but a fortunate one for our diverse community. I'd be happy to show you the county records if you'd care to ride into Willow Creek. Felicity had no idea if what the Reverend claimed was true, but his confident tone made even Sheriff Holden hesitate. We'll look into that, Holden said finally, clearly unwilling to back down entirely but equally unwilling to start a gunfight against superior numbers with a Reverend as witness. Jenkins, we're leaving. As the Dallas men turned their horses and rode away, Felicity released the breath she'd been holding. Beside her, Odell remained tense until they disappeared from view. Thank you, Reverend, he said finally, turning to the older man. Your timing couldn't have been better. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Reverend Porter replied with a twinkle in his eye. Though in this case, he had some help from Miguel here, who sent a boy to fetch me when he spotted those riders. Miguel shrugged modestly when Felicity looked at him in gratitude. Is it true? She asked the Reverend. About the county ordinances, he chuckled. Let's just say it would take them quite some time to prove otherwise, and by then, perhaps minds and laws will have changed. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the Reverend had departed with promises to keep watch for further trouble, Felicity found herself again on the porch with Odell. The encounter with Sheriff Holden had left her shaken, but also oddly exhilarated. "I should leave," she said abruptly, breaking the silence between them. "They'll keep coming back, putting you and the children in danger." "No," Odell said firmly. "Running solves nothing. This is your home now." The simple declaration stunned her. Your home. In the 3 months since her arrival, she'd grown attached to the ranch, to the children, to the rhythms of life here, but she'd never quite let herself believe it could be permanent. "Odell," she began hesitantly, "I'm grateful more than I can say, but I can't allow you to put everything at risk for me." "It's not just for you," he corrected her. "It's for what's right, for what I want my children to understand about standing up for their beliefs even when it's difficult." He moved closer to her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "Besides," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "the children would be heartbroken if you left. They've come to care for you deeply." "And you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. In the dim light of the porch lantern, she saw something flicker across his features: uncertainty, perhaps, or vulnerability. "I've grown accustomed to having you here," he admitted, which wasn't quite an answer but wasn't a denial either. Before she could respond, a small voice called from inside. "Pa, Miss Davis." They turned to find Thomas in the doorway, barefoot in his nightshirt, his eyes wide with worry. "What is it, little man?" Odell asked gently. "Are the bad men gone?" Thomas asked. "James said they came to take Miss Davis away." Felicity moved to him, kneeling despite the twinge from her healing scars. "The bad men are gone, Thomas," she assured him, "and I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" he asked solemnly. She glanced up at Odell, who was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I promise," she said firmly, returning her attention to Thomas. "Now let's get you back to bed." As she led the boy upstairs, she felt Odell's gaze following them. Something had shifted between them today, some acknowledgement that what bound them together was more than convenience or circumstance. What exactly it was, she wasn't yet ready to name, but she felt its presence as surely as the warmth of Thomas's small hand in hers. July brought intense heat to the Texas rangeland, making the schoolroom stifling by midday despite the windows thrown wide open. Felicity adapted by moving lessons to the shade of a large oak tree behind the house during the hottest hours, where the occasional breeze made learning more bearable. One particularly hot afternoon, as the children worked on their geography assignment mapping the Western Territories, Odell approached their outdoor classroom. He'd been gone since dawn, riding the boundaries of his property with several hands, and dust covered his clothes and hat. "Miss Davis," he called, "might I borrow you for a moment?" Curious, Felicity set the children to continuing their maps and joined him a short distance away. "Is something wrong?" "No," he assured her, though he seemed unusually animated. "Quite the opposite. I found something I think you'll want to see." "What is it?" A smile tugged at his mouth. "It's a surprise. Can you ride? Your back, is it healed enough?" "Yes," she confirmed, intrigued by his mysterious behavior. "Rosa says the scars have set well." "Good. Tomorrow then we'll ride out after breakfast." Seeing her questioning look, he added, "The children can have a holiday from lessons. Rosa will watch them." That night, Felicity found herself unable to sleep, curious about Odell's surprise. In the 3 months she'd been at the ranch, he'd never suggested any outing together, certainly not one that excluded the children. What could he have found that warranted such secrecy? Next morning, after a hearty breakfast, Odell and Felicity set out on horseback. She rode a gentle mare named Daisy, while Odell sat astride his Palomino stallion, Thunder. The day promised to be hot again, but the early morning still held some coolness, and Felicity enjoyed the sensation of freedom as they rode away from the ranch. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" she asked as they crested a hill, looking out over rolling grasslands dotted with cattle. "Patience," he replied, but his expression was lighter than usual, almost playful. "It's about an hour's ride." They rode in companionable silence for a while, Odell occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or sharing bits of ranch history. Felicity found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair, the confidence with which he sat his horse. After riding for nearly an hour, they approached a small valley she hadn't seen before. A creek ran through it, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. But what caught her attention was a small structure nestled among the trees, a cabin, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a small front porch. "What is this place?" she asked as they dismounted. "It was a line shack originally," Odell explained, tying the horses to a hitching post. "Built for hands to use during roundup or when checking the far boundaries. It hasn't been used much in recent years." He led her to the cabin door, which opened with a creak of hinges that suggested disuse. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunbeams that streamed through the windows, illuminating a simple but sturdy interior: a main room with a fireplace, a small bedchamber, and what appeared to be a storage area. "It needs work," Odell acknowledged, watching her reaction carefully. "A good cleaning, some repairs to the roof, new glass in that broken window, but it's solid." Felicity turned slowly, taking it all in, still confused about why he'd brought her here. "It's lovely," she said honestly. "So peaceful, I thought," he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "That is, it occurred to me that this might serve as a school." She looked at him in surprise. "A school," he nodded, moving to open the shutters wider, letting in more light. "After what happened with Holden and his men, I've been thinking. The Saturday lessons in Willow Creek are good, but they put you at risk every time you travel there. Here on my land, you'd be safer." "You want me to teach here?" she clarified, trying to understand his vision. "Not just my children," he explained. "Any child who wants to learn. The families from Willow Creek, even," he hesitated briefly, "even the children from surrounding ranches whose parents can't or won't teach them, free or enslaved." The magnitude of what he was suggesting took her breath away. "Odell, that would be controversial," he finished for her. "Yes. Possibly dangerous, but it would be the right thing." She moved around the cabin, imagining it transformed: benches for students, shelves of books, a blackboard, children of all races learning together. It was everything she believed in, everything she'd risked her life for in Dallas. "Why?" she asked finally, turning to face him. "Why would you do this? Risk everything: your ranch, your reputation, possibly even your safety and that of your children?" He was silent for a long moment, watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "When Alina was dying," he said finally, his voice low and rough with emotion, "she made me promise two things: to raise our children to be good people who think for themselves and to find happiness again someday." He took a step closer to Felicity. "For 2 years, I focused only on the first promise, then you arrived." "Odell," she whispered, hardly daring to believe what he seemed to be saying, "you remind me what it's like to believe in something so strongly you'd risk everything for it," he continued. "You've brought life back to our home, hope back to my children, and if I'm honest, you've awakened feelings in me I thought were buried with Alina." Felicity's breath caught. They stood barely an arm's length apart now, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. "I don't expect anything from you," he added quickly. "The school is yours regardless, but I wanted you to know that your presence here has meant more than I can say." Felicity had always prided herself on her eloquence, her ability to find the right words for any situation. But in this moment, words failed her. Instead, she closed the distance between them and, standing on tiptoe, pressed her lips gently to his. For an instant, Odell froze as though surprised by her boldness. Then his arms came around her, careful of her scarred back, and he returned her kiss with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I take it that means you'll stay," he murmured. She laughed softly. "I already promised Thomas I would, remember?" "So you did," he agreed, his smile warming his usually serious face. "And I've found you're a woman who keeps her promises, Felicity Davis." They spent the rest of the morning exploring the cabin and its surroundings, discussing what would be needed to convert it into a school. Odell had clearly given it considerable thought. Already he spoke of building additional benches, ordering more books, perhaps adding another room if the number of students warranted it. As they sat by the creek sharing the lunch Rosa had packed for them, Felicity marveled at the turn her life had taken. 4 months ago, she'd been tied to a whipping post in Dallas, certain her teaching days, perhaps even her life, were over. Now she sat beside a man who not only valued her convictions but shared them, planning a school that could change countless lives. "What are you thinking?" Odell asked, noticing her contemplative expression. That life is full of unexpected turns, she replied honestly. And that sometimes what seems like an ending is actually the beginning of something better than you could have imagined. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. I couldn't have said it better myself. When they returned to the ranch that afternoon, the children rushed out to meet them, full of questions about where they'd been and what they'd seen. Felicity watched as Odell lifted Thomas onto his shoulders, his other arm around Sarah, while James danced around them, demanding to know if they'd seen any wolves or mountain lions on their ride. In that moment, seeing them together, this man and his children who had welcomed her into their lives, Felicity felt a certainty settle in her heart. This was where she belonged. This was home. The transformation of the line shack into a school became a project for the entire ranch over the next few weeks. Odell's hands, when not busy with cattle, helped repair the roof and replace broken windows. Miguel crafted simple but sturdy benches and tables. Rosa sewed curtains for the windows and cushions for the seats. Even the children contributed, James helping to whitewash the walls, Sarah decorating the curtains with careful embroidery, and Thomas solemnly collecting smooth stones to line the path to the front door. Word spread cautiously through Willow Creek about the new school. Reverend Porter was instrumental in identifying families who might be interested, speaking privately with those he trusted. By early August, Felicity had a list of 15 potential students beyond the Grayson children, a diverse group that included the children of ranch hands, shopkeepers, and yes, even 2 children who were technically enslaved, though their master apparently turned a blind eye to their occasional disappearances. "Are you nervous?" Odell asked her the evening before the school was set to open. They sat together on the porch swing, his arm comfortably around her shoulders as the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "A little," she admitted. "Not about the teaching, but about the risk to everyone involved," he nodded, understanding her concern. "We've taken precautions. Miguel and 2 other hands will patrol whenever classes are in session. We've established signals and escape routes if trouble comes. And legally, Reverend Porter assures me we're in something of a gray area, at least enough to make it difficult for anyone to take official action against us. And unofficially," she pressed, "men like Sheriff Holden don't always worry about legal niceties." "Unofficially," Odell said grimly, "they know crossing onto Grayson land uninvited would be a mistake they might not live to regret." She laid her head against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Their relationship had deepened over the past weeks, moving from tentative attraction to something profound and certain. They hadn't spoken of marriage, it felt too soon after their declarations at the cabin, but Felicity could feel it on the horizon, a future taking shape between them. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I'm grateful for this chance to teach freely, to make a difference." "And I'm grateful you stayed," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "though I still think I got the better end of the bargain." The school opening the next day exceeded all of Felicity's hopes. 22 students in total arrived, the Grayson children, the 15 she'd expected from Reverend Porter's list, and 4 more who appeared with their parents, having heard through whispered channels that a teacher was offering education to all. They ranged in age from 6 to 16, with varying levels of previous education. Some, like James and Sarah, had basic literacy and numeracy. Others, particularly the older enslaved children, had never held a book before. Felicity organized them into groups based on ability rather than age or race, an arrangement that raised eyebrows among some of the white parents, but which she insisted was necessary for effective teaching. "Your son will advance faster if he's challenged appropriately," she explained to one skeptical father. "And helping those who know less will reinforce his own knowledge." By midday, the initial awkwardness had faded as the children became absorbed in their lessons. Watching them work together, James helping a Mexican boy sound out words, a black teenager explaining a mathematics concept to Sarah, Felicity felt a profound sense of rightness. This was education as it should be, blind to color and status, focused only on nurturing minds and spirits. The school quickly established its rhythm through late summer and into fall. Classes met 4 days a week, with Felicity devoting the 5th day to preparing lessons and assessing progress. Students arrived in small groups at staggered times, a security measure Odell had insisted upon to avoid drawing attention to their numbers. Not everyone in the area approved, of course. There were whispers in Willow Creek, families who withdrew from church rather than worship alongside those who sent their children to the mixed school. A neighboring rancher confronted Odell at the general store, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're undermining the natural order, Grayson. Giving notions to those who have no business having them." "The only notion I'm giving," Odell had replied evenly, "is that learning to read won't cause the sky to fall. If that threatens your natural order, maybe it wasn't so natural to begin with." The confrontation didn't escalate beyond words, but it heightened Felicity's awareness of the precarious nature of what they were doing. Every morning as she rode to the school cabin, she scanned the horizon for unfamiliar riders. Every afternoon as students departed in their small groups, she watched until they were safely out of sight. October brought cooler weather and the need for fires in the cabin's stone fireplace. It also brought a letter, delivered by Reverend Porter, that changed everything. "It's from Boston," Felicity told Odell as they sat in his study that evening, the unopened envelope between them on the desk. "My former employer at the girls' school there. You're not obligated to open it," he pointed out, watching her carefully. "No, but I should." She broke the seal and unfolded the letter, scanning its contents quickly. Her expression shifted from curiosity to shock. "What is it?" Odell asked, concerned. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "It's an offer. The Massachusetts Education Society is establishing new schools for freed slaves in areas occupied by Union forces. They're looking for experienced teachers willing to go south." Odell's face remained carefully neutral. "I see. They need people who have already demonstrated commitment to educating those previously denied learning," she continued, still processing the information herself. "Reverend Porter must have written to them about our school here. It's an important cause," Odell acknowledged, his voice even. "One you've risked everything for." Felicity studied him, realizing he was intentionally not influencing her decision. "They want an answer within the month," she said. "I would leave after Christmas if I accept." He nodded, then stood and moved to the window, looking out into the darkness. "You should think carefully about it," he said finally. "This is the work you've dedicated yourself to. The chance to do it officially with support and resources doesn't come along every day." She joined him at the window, standing close enough to feel his warmth but not touching. "And what about us?" she asked softly. "What about the school here, the children, both yours and the others?" He turned to face her then, his expression a mixture of emotions she couldn't fully read. "We would manage," he said, though the words seemed to cost him. "Your happiness matters to me, Felicity. If this is what you need to do, I won't stand in your way." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "And if my happiness is here, with you, with the children, with our school." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, but carefully restrained. "Then that would be a choice I'd honor just as much," he replied. "But I need you to be certain. I don't want you looking back years from now, wondering what might have been if you'd taken this opportunity." "I need time to think," she admitted. "This isn't a decision to make hastily." "Take all the time you need," he assured her, bringing their joined hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Whatever you decide, know that you have made an indelible mark on this family, on this community. Nothing can change that." The following weeks were among the most difficult of Felicity's life. She continued teaching at the cabin school, cherishing each moment with her students even as she weighed what it might mean to leave them. In the evenings, she would sit with Odell's children, helping with homework or reading stories, acutely aware that each such moment might be numbered. With Odell himself, there was a new tension not unpleasant, but weighted with unspoken possibilities. He remained supportive, never pressuring her, but she caught the longing in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening in early November, as the first true cold front swept across the ranch, Felicity found herself unable to sleep. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she made her way downstairs, intending to make some tea. To her surprise, Odell was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread before him. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, a tired smile crossing his face. "Ranch accounts," he explained, gesturing to the ledgers. "I've been putting them off." She moved to the stove, filling the kettle. "Would you like some tea, please?" They sat in companionable silence as the water heated, then as she prepared 2 cups of the fragrant brew. Only when they were both settled at the table, steam rising between them, did Odell speak again. "I've been thinking about your Boston letter," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "As have I," she replied. Almost constantly, he nodded, as though this confirmed something for him. "I have a confession to make," he continued, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "I've been selfish in my response." "Selfish," she echoed, confused. "Odell, you've been nothing but supportive." "Outwardly, perhaps," he acknowledged. "But inwardly, I've been fighting the urge to beg you to stay." He took a deep breath, seemed to gather himself. "The truth is, Felicity, I love you. I think I have since that day on the porch when you told me you wouldn't hide from Holden and his men." Her heart swelled at his words, even as she registered the pain behind them. "That's not selfish," she whispered. "That's human." "Maybe," he conceded, "but loving someone means wanting what's best for them even when it hurts, and I've been struggling with that part." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Odell Grayson, do you know what I've been thinking about these past weeks? Not whether I should go to Boston, but why I would even consider it when everything I want is right here." Hope flared in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you too," she replied simply. "I love your children, I love our school and what we're building here. The work in Boston is important, yes, but so is what we're doing in this small corner of Texas." "You're staying." His voice was rough with emotion. "If you'll have me," she confirmed, her own eyes growing moist. "Not just as your children's teacher, but as my wife," he finished for her, rising from his chair and moving to kneel beside hers. "Felicity Davis, I don't have a ring ready, and this isn't how I plan to ask, but I love you more than I thought possible after Aliner. Will you marry me? Be a mother to my children and a partner in everything we're building here?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, too overwhelmed for words. He gathered her into his arms, and their kiss tasted of tea and salt and joy. "When?" he asked when they finally parted. "How soon can you be my wife?" she laughed, giddy with happiness. "How does Christmas sound?" "A new beginning as the year ends." "Too far away," he grumbled, making her laugh again. "But I suppose it will give us time to prepare properly. The children will be ecstatic. They've been dropping hints for weeks about how nice it would be if their teacher lived with them all the time." "They have they?" she asked, amused. "James suggested I might need to build an addition to the house for all the new brothers and sisters they're hoping for," Odell admitted, a blush actually coloring his weathered cheeks. "Well," Felicity said, leaning in to kiss him again, "we wouldn't want to disappoint them." The next morning, they gathered the children at breakfast to share their news. Their reactions were everything Felicity could have hoped for, James whooping in triumph as though he'd personally arranged the match, Sarah clapping her hands in delight, and Thomas solemnly asking if this meant he could call Felicity Ma now. "If you'd like to," she told him, her heart overflowing as the small boy nodded decisively. The announcement of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and then to Willow Creek. Most received the news with pleasure. Rosa wept happy tears, and Reverend Porter immediately offered to perform the ceremony. "December 23rd, Odell told him. "Before Christmas, but after the school break begins, so all the students can attend if they wish." The wedding preparations gave Felicity a welcome distraction from the Boston offer, which she politely declined by return post. She explained that she had found her calling in Texas, teaching children who might otherwise never have the opportunity to learn. "I believe one small school reaching across racial and social boundaries here may accomplish as much as many schools elsewhere," she wrote. "Change must happen in all places, not just those already inclined toward progress." With Rosa's help, she sewed a wedding dress of ivory silk ordered from San Antonio. Odell, meanwhile, commissioned a proper wedding ring from a silversmith in Willow Creek, who incorporated small blue stones that matched Felicity's eyes. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy with both preparations and normal ranch activities. The school continued to thrive, with word spreading carefully among those who might need it. By December, Felicity had 30 students of varying ages and backgrounds, necessitating the addition Odell had mentioned for the cabin. 2 weeks before the wedding, as the first real cold snap of winter gripped the region, trouble finally found them. It began with a student failing to arrive for lessons, a 12-year-old black boy named Daniel, who had been secretly attending for nearly 2 months. His absence alone might not have alarmed Felicity, but when a second student from the same plantation didn't appear the following day, she grew concerned. "Something's wrong," she told Odell that evening. Joseph said Daniel's master was asking questions about where he disappeared to 3 days a week. Odell's expression darkened. "I'll send Miguel to make discreet inquiries in the morning." But before Miguel could depart, a breathless rider arrived at the ranch, Reverend Porter himself, his normally tidy appearance disheveled from hard riding. "They've taken them," he gasped as Odell helped him from his horse. "4 of your students, Daniel, Eliza, Marcus, and Lucy. Arrested for stealing education, they're calling it." "That's not even a real charge," Felicity protested as they hurried inside. "It doesn't matter," the Reverend said grimly. "Sheriff Holden is holding them in Willow Creek. He's come with men from Dallas, claiming jurisdiction because the crime originated there with you." Odell's face had gone hard as stone. "Where are they being held exactly?" "The storeroom behind the dry goods shop," Porter replied. "They've got 6 men guarding it. Holden says he's taking them to Dallas tomorrow for trial." "Trial for what?" Felicity demanded, anger overriding fear. "Learning to read, this is madness." "It's a message," Odell said quietly, his calm more frightening than outrage would have been. "Holden's making an example of them to get to you, to us. We have to help them," Felicity insisted. "Those children have done nothing wrong." "No, they haven't," Odell agreed, already moving toward the gun cabinet. "Reverend, can you stay here with my children? Rosa will look after you, Miguel." He called, and the young man appeared instantly from the kitchen. "Gather 5 men you trust completely, armed. Meet me at the barn in 10 minutes. "Odell," Felicity caught his arm. "What are you planning?" His eyes, when they met hers, were cold with determination. "I'm planning to get those children back before Holden can take them to Dallas. Once they're there, we'll never see them again." "I'm coming with you," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. For a moment she thought he might refuse, might insist she stay safely behind. Instead, he nodded. "Change into riding clothes, bring your warmest coat. It's going to be a cold night." The plan they formulated was both simple and desperate. Felicity would create a distraction at the front of the dry goods store, claiming to have urgent business with the owner despite the late hour. While attention was focused on her, Odell and his men would approach from behind, overwhelm the guards, and free the children. "What then?" she asked as they rode toward Willow Creek, the winter moon casting sharp shadows across the landscape. "They can't go back to their masters." "No," Odell agreed. "They'll have to go north. I have connections with people who help runaways reach free states." "It was arranged for another purpose, but it will serve for this as well." Felicity looked at him in surprise. "You've been helping escaped slaves?" A grim smile touched his mouth. "Not actively until now, but I've known how to contact the right people if the need arose. Eliner's family in Pennsylvania are abolitionists. They showed me the way stations of the Underground Railroad years ago." Another piece of the puzzle that was Odell Grayson fell into place for Felicity. No wonder he'd been so quick to defend her in Dallas, to offer sanctuary when others had turned away. As they approached Willow Creek, they split into 2 groups. Felicity continued on the main road with Miguel as her escort, while Odell and the other men circled around to approach the dry goods store from behind. "Be careful," Odell told her before they separated, catching her hand. "If anything seems wrong, if Holden himself is there, abort immediately. Ride for home and we'll find another way." "I will," she promised, "but those children are counting on us. I won't let them down if I can help it." The town was quiet as Felicity and Miguel rode in, most buildings dark except for the saloon and, tellingly, the dry goods store, where lamplight still shone despite the late hour. They dismounted a short distance away, leaving the horses ready for a quick departure. "Wait 5 minutes after I go in," Felicity reminded Miguel. "Then join me if all seems well." Taking a deep breath, she straightened her coat and walked purposefully toward the store. Through the window, she could see 3 men inside the shopkeeper looking uncomfortable, and 2 others she recognized as part of Sheriff Holden's contingent from Dallas. The bell above the door jangled as she entered, and all 3 men turned to stare at her. Miss Davis, the shopkeeper said, clearly surprised. What brings you to town so late, Mr. Wilson? She acknowledged with a nod. I need to purchase fabric for my wedding dress. An emergency. I'm afraid the silk I ordered from San Antonio was damaged in transit, and the ceremony is in less than 2 weeks. It was a flimsy excuse, but she sold it with every ounce of feminine distress she could muster, wringing her hands and letting tears gather in her eyes. The shop's closed, madam, one of Holden's men said gruffly. Come back tomorrow. Oh, but I can't, she exclaimed, moving further into the store, drawing their attention away from the back room where the children were presumably held. You see, I simply must have the fabric tonight so Rosa can begin work first thing in the morning. Mr. Grayson has invited half the county to the wedding, and I cannot possibly appear in a patched dress. Mr. Wilson, caught between irritation at the late intrusion and the pull of potential profit, wavered visibly. Well, I suppose I could show you what we have. That would be wonderful, Felicity gushed, allowing him to lead her toward the fabric section at the front of the store, away from the back room. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Miguel enter, positioning himself casually near the door. The 2 guards watched him suspiciously but remained at their posts. I was thinking perhaps a cream brocade, Felicity continued loudly, handling bolts of fabric with exaggerated care. Something with a subtle pattern, don't you think? A sudden commotion from the back room made everyone freeze, the sound of a scuffle, a muffled shout, then silence. The 2 guards exchanged alarmed glances, then drew their pistols. Check it out, one ordered the other, who moved cautiously toward the back room. Felicity's heart pounded as she continued her charade. Mr. Wilson, what about this one? Do you think it has enough drape for a proper train? The second guard had just reached the door to the back room when it burst open, revealing Odell with a pistol in one hand and a finger to his lips in warning. Behind him, Felicity glimpsed the 4 children, wide-eyed but apparently unharmed, and the other ranch hands securing what must be the remaining guards. The guard by the door didn't even have time to shout before Miguel brought the butt of his pistol down on the man's head, dropping him unconscious to the floor. The other guard spun around at the sound, but Odell was faster, his pistol now aimed at the man's chest. Don't, Odell said simply. Mr. Wilson, I suggest you decide right now whether you saw anything tonight. The shopkeeper glanced between Odell's resolute face and the unconscious guard on his floor. I closed early, he said finally. Went straight home, didn't see a thing. Wise man, Odell approved. He gestured for the children to come forward. Miss Davis was just leaving, weren't you, my dear? Yes, Felicity agreed, abandoning the fabrics. I've changed my mind about the dress. I think what I have will do nicely after all. The rescue itself went more smoothly than any of them had dared hope. Within minutes, they were all mounted and riding hard away from Willow Creek, Odell and his men, Felicity, and the 4 freed children, each riding double with an adult. They didn't return directly to the ranch, knowing it would be the first place Holden would look once he discovered the escape. Instead, they rode north for several hours, following a route Odell seemed to know well, until they reached a small homestead hidden in a wooded valley. The owner, a taciturn man who introduced himself only as Smith, appeared unsurprised by their midnight arrival. You're earlier than expected, was all he said, ushering them into a warm kitchen where food waited as if he'd been expecting company. As the exhausted children ate ravenously, Odell pulled Felicity aside. This is the first stop, he explained quietly. They'll rest here today, then move north tomorrow night. Smith has connections all the way to Canada. They're so young to make such a journey alone, Felicity worried, watching the 4 children. The oldest, Marcus, was 14, the youngest, Lucy, barely 10. They won't be alone, Odell assured her. There are guides at every stage. And they're safer on this journey than they would be returned to masters who now know they've been learning to read. She nodded, acknowledging the harsh truth. What about us? We can't go back to the ranch, can we? A shadow crossed his face. Not yet, not until we know what Holden does next. If he makes this official, gets a warrant for our arrest, we might have to leave Texas altogether. The children, she whispered, thinking of James, Sarah, and Thomas, your ranch. Miguel will bring the children to us if necessary, Odell said firmly. As for the ranch, land can be bought elsewhere. Family can't. The depth of his commitment to her, to justice, to the children they'd rescued overwhelmed her. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "This is all because of me, because I couldn't stop teaching." "No," he said fiercely, taking her face between his hands. "This is because some men fear knowledge so much they'd rather keep others in chains than risk them learning the truth. Never apologize for standing against that." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we wait. Smith will send word to Miguel. If Holden raises a posse, comes after us officially, we'll head north ourselves, at least for a time. If he chooses to let it go, pretend the escape never happened, we can return home in a few days." "And our wedding?" she asked softly. A smile touched his lips. "Reverend Porter can marry us anywhere, Felicity. The date might change, but not my promise to you." They spent 2 anxious days at Smith's homestead, saying goodbye to the 4 children as they continued their journey north with another guide and waiting for news from Willow Creek. On the morning of the 3rd day, a rider appeared, not Miguel, but Reverend Porter himself. "It's over," the Reverend announced as soon as he dismounted. "Holden's gone back to Dallas." "Just like that?" Odell asked skeptically. "What happened?" "The territorial governor happened," Porter explained, accepting a cup of coffee from Smith. Apparently, word of Holden's actions reached higher authorities. Arresting children for learning to read didn't sit well, especially with tensions already high between North and South. The governor sent a telegram ordering Holden to return to his own jurisdiction and cease interfering in local matters. "That seems unusually reasonable," Felicity said cautiously. Porter's eyes twinkled. "It helps that the governor's wife is from Massachusetts and has strong opinions about education. It also helps that I might have mentioned in my telegram to the Capitol that the press in Boston would be very interested in a story about Texas lawmen imprisoning children for reading." Odell laughed, the tension of the past days finally breaking. "Reverend, you're a devious man." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Porter replied with a shrug. "Sometimes those ways include political pressure. The point is, you can go home. The school should probably remain closed until after the new year, but Holden has been thoroughly warned off." The relief of returning to the ranch was immeasurable. Rosa and the children rushed out to meet them, the boys cheering and Sarah weeping with joy as they embraced Odell and Felicity. "We thought you might not come back," James admitted that night as Felicity tucked him into bed, his voice small despite his attempt at bravado. "We will always come back to you," she promised him. "Always." The wedding took place as planned on December 23rd. The ranch house was decorated with evergreens and red ribbons, and a light snow, rare in that part of Texas, began to fall just as the ceremony began, dusting the land in white as if in blessing. Reverend Porter officiated, his voice strong as he spoke of love enduring all things, bearing all things, hoping all things. Rosa stood as Felicity's matron of honor, and the children, all 3 Graysons plus many of the students from the cabin school, watched with shining eyes as their teacher became their mother in truth. "I, Odell James Grayson, take you, Felicity Ann Davis, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Odell vowed, his voice steady but his eyes suspiciously bright. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Felicity repeated the vows, her voice clear and certain, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the whipping post in Dallas to this circle of love and purpose on the Texas frontier. Her back would always bear the scars of her commitment to education, but now those scars were a badge of honor, not shame. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Porter declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Odell's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, and the cheer that went up from their assembled friends and family seemed to shake the very rafters of the ranch house. Later, as they danced together in the parlor cleared for the purpose, Odell pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "Are you happy, Mrs. Grayson?" "Completely," she assured him. "Though I do have one regret." His arms tightened slightly around her. "What's that?" "That we had to close the school, even temporarily," she admitted. "Those children need consistency, especially after what happened." He smiled against her hair. I thought you might say that, which is why I've been thinking what if we brought the school here, convert the old bunkhouse. It's larger than the cabin, closer to the main house for security, and the hands have already moved to the new building we constructed last spring. She leaned back to look at his face, checking if he was serious. You would do that? Our home should be a place of learning, he said simply. For our children and for any others who wish to learn, it's what Alina would have wanted. It's what I want, and I think it's what you want too. It is, she confirmed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Oh, Odell, it absolutely is. They reopened the school in January 1860, now housed in the converted bunkhouse just a short walk from the main ranch house. With the governor's tacit approval never stated outright, but implied in his rebuke of Sheriff Holden, they were able to operate more openly than before. Students came from Willow Creek and beyond, their numbers growing as word spread of a place where education was available regardless of race or status. Felicity and Odell were careful to maintain security protocols, but the atmosphere was less furtive, more celebratory of the learning taking place. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The pastures turned emerald green, new calves wobbled beside their mothers, and Felicity discovered she was expecting a child of her own. Are you happy about it? Odell asked when she told him the news, his face alight with joy but his eyes searching hers for confirmation. Overjoyed, she assured him, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Another Grayson to love and teach. Their son, William Frederick Grayson, was born on a crisp October morning in 1860, with Rosa serving as midwife and the older children waiting anxiously outside the bedroom door. When Odell finally invited them in to meet their new brother, their reactions were everything the new parents could have hoped for: awe, excitement, and immediate acceptance. He's so small, Thomas whispered, peering into the blanket-wrapped bundle. You were smaller, James informed him with the authority of an older brother. I remember. Sarah simply climbed onto the bed beside Felicity and stroked the baby's cheek with gentle wonder. He has pa's eyes, she observed, but your nose, Ma. The word Ma still brought tears to Felicity's eyes every time one of the children used it. Now, holding her newborn son while her 3 older children crowded close, she felt a completeness she had never imagined possible when she'd been tied to that whipping post in Dallas. As the years passed, the Grayson Ranch became known throughout the region as a place of learning and progress. The school expanded to accommodate more students, eventually employing additional teachers recruited from northern states by Reverend Porter's connections. The Civil War touched them, of course, as it touched all of America. Texas joined the Confederacy, and there were those who viewed the Graysons' educational efforts with renewed suspicion and hostility. But the remote location of the ranch, coupled with Odell's reputation as a formidable man not to be trifled with, provided some protection. By the time the war ended in 1865, the Grayson School had educated over 100 children of all races. Many went on to become teachers themselves, spreading the vision of inclusive education throughout the reconstructing South. Felicity and Odell added 3 more children to their family over the years: twin daughters, Alina and Rose, born in 1862, and another son, Joseph, who arrived in 1865 just as peace was declared. On the 20th anniversary of the school's founding, former students gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Now adults with children of their own, they spoke movingly of what their education had meant to them. Among them was Daniel, one of the 4 children Odell and Felicity had rescued that winter night. He had made his way back to Texas after the war, now a free man with a teaching certificate from a college in Ohio. I remember being so scared that night, he told the assembled crowd. Certain I was going to be sold south for trying to learn my letters. Instead, I found myself on a journey to freedom, not just of body but of mind. He turned to where Felicity and Odell sat, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. You two didn't just teach me to read. You taught me that standing up for what's right is always worth the risk. That lesson has guided my whole life since. That night, after the celebration had ended and the house was quiet, Odell and Felicity sat on their porch swing as they had so many evenings before. Though gray now threaded his hair and fine lines marked the corners of her eyes, they still looked at each other with the same love and respect that had grown between them over the decades. "Did you ever imagine," he asked, his arm around her shoulders, "when I rode into Dallas that day that we'd end up here?" She shook her head, leaning into his embrace. "Never. I thought I was going to die tied to that post. And I thought I'd never love again after Alina," he admitted. "We were both wrong in the best possible way." "The very best way," she agreed, turning her face up for his kiss. Behind them, the ranch house stood solid and welcoming, its windows glowing with warmth. Beyond it, the school buildings there were three now waited for morning, when they would again fill with the voices of children learning, questioning, growing. And all around them stretched the land that had become home, the place where one woman's determination to teach and one man's courage to support her had created something that would outlast them both. It had begun with punishment for teaching slaves to read. It had transformed into a legacy of education that would endure for generations to come. And at its heart was a love story of two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something extraordinary together. In the end, Felicity reflected, that was the most important lesson of all, that love, like knowledge, should be freely given to all who seek it. It was a lesson worth teaching, a lesson worth living for.